We are live, the game before the money, live with Upton Bell. Upton, co-author of Present at the Creation, published by the University of Nebraska Press. But we're going to talk NFL draft with Upton because Upton's dad, as owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, created the draft. So everything you're going to watch tomorrow night and the hoopla, that started with Upton's dad. Also, Upton worked in the Baltimore Colts personnel department through the 1960s, helped build two Super Bowl teams, the team that played in Super Bowl III and the team that won Super Bowl V. He's with us now. How you doing, Upton?
I'm doing fine, and great to be on, talking to all of those thousands out there on Facebook, getting ready for the draft. And I will say this, that in the 10 years that I spent with the Colts, it was just the beginning of developing what today is considered the modern draft, although you could go all the way back. I'm sure you'll get into that. And then coming to the Patriots for 2 years and building a totally different draft system with Bucko Kilroy and the Dallas Cowboys. So anyway, it's great to be on. It's great to be on Facebook with all your listeners.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. And we forgot to mention that you also worked for the New England Patriots for a while and even moved up to GM for a season. But let's talk about the origins of the NFL draft. That started with your father after he had founded the Philadelphia Eagles, right?
It is, and I would like to, because so much of history is lost, because today I have got three TV sets, and I watch all of this stuff that's going on, and whether it's on ESPN, whether it's your show, all the different shows, it's become a cottage industry. The draft itself, not only the NFL and the way it promotes it, but what people don't know is, even going back to the pre-NFL in the 1920s, there was no draft then, and then in 1925, when the NFL essentially, it wasn't the original name, was formed in Canton, Ohio, and then from 1925, actually, and this is the interesting part in many ways as a pre kind of runner to the draft, is from 1925 to 1933, when my father founded the Philadelphia Eagles franchise. Basically, there were 20 teams that went out of business. I mean, the NFL really did struggle. And of course, then he saw, and the other teams saw that weren't the Chicago Bears or the Washington, as they called them, Redskins, or the New York Football Giants, or a power then in the 30s was the Green Bay Packers. That basically, that if it continued, and those teams just continue to dominate, teams like the Eagles and the Steelers, both he and Art Rooney founded their teams at the same time in 1933. And he could see that if you didn't really have money and weren't able to support it, you were going to go out of business.
Yeah, and that happened, as you brought up, it happened to so many teams, even like the Dayton Triangles, who were really successful. Success on the field didn't necessarily mean that you were going to keep that team afloat financially. And, the Packers, in fact, had several problems, and that's how they kind of formed that nonprofit organization.
Well, they did. They actually, it's still around today. They many times, even in the 50s, just before my father died, he had to call CBS and borrow the money from Tex Schramm, who had left the Rams, and went to CBS as part of their television package. He called Schramm and he said, if I can't get a couple $100,000 of Packers, this is in the 50s.
Yeah.
Late 50s, they're going out of business. So Schramm actually gave him the money, and they built a new stadium. And actually, you can go online somewhere and see the video. He dedicated the Green Bay Packers Stadium, and standing right next to him, and you can't see him in the film. It was filmed then, is Richard Nixon, the vice president, came to help with Bert Bell to really, open up the new stadium. So even into the 50s, and sometimes into the 60s, believe it or not, the NFL had their problems. But there's no question in my mind that Bert Bell saw he was losing money. Art Rooney saw he was losing money. These teams, even the ones you were just talking about, in the smaller cities were losing money. And there was no way to recoup that in 1935, he went to the league meetings, and I think they were in February, and the meetings were in Pittsburgh, and he said to the owners that famous quote, "We're only as strong as our weakest link." And he said, in his opinion, that he had looked at everything, and this was a genius of Bert Bell, was that he saw the league was going to go under, and there might be only 4 franchises left. And he proposed, and he worked it out, and proposed to the owners a draft, and in the inverse order of your record. So he said the one way to basically save those teams in pro football was to have a draft, and that way the strongest teams would draft last. And surprisingly, they passed it, I think, almost unanimously in 1935 at the league meetings, and then in 1936 they had their first draft. But of course, he also had, the bitter experience of Stanley Koska, whom I knew you were going to get involved in. So why don't you tell part of that story, and then I'll tell you what happened with that whole thing. Great running back out of the University of Minnesota.
Absolutely. That is kind of the event that kind of triggered the start of the draft. Stan Costa coming out of the University of Minnesota as a fullback. He had several teams interested in him the year before the draft. And, he would tell them, well, the Bears told me that they'd give me $4,000. And then he'd tell the next team, well, they were going to give me, $5,000. And he kept upping it. He was really pretty clever in what he was doing. But the teams started negotiating against each other. And he signed a contract that was worth more than Bronco Nagurski's contract. And Bronco Nagurski was one of the biggest stars in the league.
Yeah, Hall of Fame. There was a video that I did on that, one of 9 videos that are now being taken a look at as a documentary on my life. And in the documentary, the interviewer actually put together the true story. My father got on a train that went from Philadelphia, I don't know how many days, out to Minneapolis to talk to Koska. Spent 2 days there. And finally, at the end of it, Koska said, well, let me think it over. And my father got back on the train, and on his way back, as legend has it, he finally said, I can't do this. We can't do this. We have to find a better way. And so that's how the father of the modern draft, Bert Bell, really, that convinced him that every college, a big-time college player, are going to do the same thing, because there was no way to control anything. And the same teams always were there. The Bears, the Giants. In this case, one of the teams that were after him was actually there was a fairly wealthy team with a wealthy owner that was called the Brooklyn Dodgers.
The NFL's Brooklyn Dodgers, yes.
The NFL Brooklyn Dodgers. And so the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers got involved in it. So they're all bidding against each other, cutting each other's throat. But as a result, again, my father saw, Rooney won't be around, I won't be around. Ironically, a couple of years later, after that, he sold the Eagles, and he and Rooney became equal partners in the Steelers. But I mean, it is Purely what you get today is purely from the background of pure survival.
It is. It is, and that's what gets overlooked, I think, Upton, is that in your dad's case, and seeing his friend Art Rooney, and it's impossible to think of the NFL without the Eagles and Steelers, but they could have gone under, and the Brooklyn Dodgers signed Stan Costa for that enormous, for the time, I think it was a $5,000 contract with a $500 signing bonus, and that was a lot of money.
A lot of money. That would be like $100,000, maybe more today.
And when they were starting up, and Stan Costa ended up with 249 total yards. So it they didn't get any value from him, and they just threw that money out the window. And at that time, with the NFL, as you just shared, NFL owners, money was at a premium as far as salaries.
Well, the other thing that's ironic, if we're jumping way ahead, and we'll get to that later on in the show, is that basically today, just like then, it's a gamble. I don't care. Trevor Lawrence, he's one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen come in. He could still be a bust. You look at all of the top quarterbacks at the top of this draft, and all the discussion day after day ad nauseum. Every one of them could be a disaster. You don't know, as you pointed out with Costa. So basically, when you look at what happened then, and the first draft, which is historic, and actually it was in 1936 at my father's hotel, the Ritz-Carlton on Broad Street in Philadelphia. It's now a huge pizza parlor in a big building, but then it was one of the ritziest hotels in Philadelphia. Many of the Hollywood stars and people that came east, they stayed at the Ritz-Carlton. Well, nobody had any money, so his father said, okay, take over the hotel, which he did, and on the second floor of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, in 1936, I think it was February, the first NFL draft was held. There was a blackboard, big blackboard in the room. The names were put up on the blackboard, and there were no scouting combines. There were no scouts. It was basically off, some advice from college coaches, and mainly Street and Smith or whatever it was at that time, and press clippings from newspapers around the country. But all those names were put up there, and the first draft was held there. No press in attendance. Look at what's happened today.
No, wow.
Thousands of people, even in the middle of a pandemic. No press showed up. No publicity on it. The owners had a couple of drinks downstairs, and they came up to the blackboard with the names on it. And this is what I really want your public people on Facebook to understand, that those names up on that board, it went, I think, like 12 or 13 rounds. And basically, of the names up on that board, and this is why I say, even today, millions of dollars being spent. Everything, his navel, the player's navel, every part of his body is looked at. Out of that draft, 4 out of the 4 names, 3 of them went to the Hall of Fame. And the 4th one was Bear Bryant, who decided not to play pro football. Of course, became the legendary coach.
That's incredible. And I don't think very many people know that Bear Bryant, the famous Alabama coach, was drafted in the first NFL draft. And
in the first round.
In the first round, even. And he didn't play pro football. And the first ever choice, who was also the first Heisman Trophy winner, that went to your dad's team. And could you talk to us about that? So,
well, just his luck. I mean, he knew that Bert Bell was going to have to team was going to have the worst record. They had no money. And his father, who was one of the richest men in Philadelphia, and actually was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania at one time, said, Bert, and again, you have to remember this too. In the 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way up to the 60s, college football was the king in America. Major League Baseball, college football, and believe it or not, or horse racing. They were the sports.
And boxing was big too.
Boxing. So most people who were drafted said, what the hell do I want to be in the NFL for? And in the case of Jay Berlinger, he said, I need to get a job. So my father traded his rights, the first big trade, to the Bears for a player. And what happened was the Bears couldn't sign him either. So he never played. But the other players that were drafted, again, nobody knew a hell of a lot. But they knew the names. Joe Steinhardt was one of them. Later on became the Rams coach, great player. He went to the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Famer, yeah.
So what you saw there, not only that, they couldn't get the press interested. The first time there was a report even of the draft was 2 weeks later. It took 2 weeks to make it to newspapers. And you had great writers around that. People like Red Smith and many of, in the 30s and 40s when newspapers were really it. The Damon Runyons, the Red Smiths, the Arthur Dailies, I mean, they're all in somebody's Hall of Fame. They were such great writers and such great wordsmiths. But you couldn't get any room in the paper for the Eagles, even though in my father's life story on any given Sunday, basically, they tell the story. I mean, in some ways, it's laughable what happened. But that first draft, I can tell you this: if he had not invented the draft, you would not be talking about pro football at all today, because basically the league was going to go under. There weren't enough teams. You can't have a league with only 4 teams. And what would have happened is maybe in 1947, 46, 47, right after the Second World War, when the old All-American Conference was founded with Paul Brown and that great team, which to me were better than all the NFL teams. But you would have had to hold on till after World War II to see if another league emerged. But there's no question in my mind, what you see today would have been like the ruins of Rome. There was no there. And so...
And ultimately, the draft between the NFL and the AFL, the war that was going on, that almost put both leagues under, and that led to the merger.
Well, it did, but I do want to finish up on that part of the early times. Is that
sure.
Basically Arthur Daly, the Hall of Fame writer for the New York Times, said if Bert Bell did nothing else, he said that is his monument on the Hall of Fame. He said he changed forever the way you look at pro football. So yeah, let's jump now.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to say, and pro sports in general, because although a player draft from the worst team drafting first to the best team drafting last, it seems obvious to us. It seems
every league adopted it. Not only that, it survived many challenges in court, which again, I don't think your audience knows, and I understand people today, they only know the names of the draft and where it's being held. But basically, because his brother, John C. Bell Jr., who was the lieutenant governor and governor of Pennsylvania later on, but then became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, actually helped write a lot of the legal part of the Constitution and bylaws of the NFL. A lot of it's still in there today. he had to advise him all the time because they were getting sued. And I can remember many times listening to him talk on the phone as a young boy and talking about the real danger and having to go to court because judges and even Congress said, wait a minute, this is restraint of trade. You're forcing a player to go to a place that he probably doesn't want to go to, and to the worst team. And there were many challenges to that. So again, there is a real history if people are willing to look at it as a rocky road to what you see, this grandeur of draft night that will be coming up. So all along the way, at any time, this draft could have been declared unconstitutional.
Like you said, there were a lot of challenges to it, and some of the player strikes did include elements of challenging the draft.
Yeah, no, I understand. But again, back to the irony of it, every player who's retired is the beneficiary of the Bert Bell pension fund. They added Pete Rozelle's name later on after he died, but it's the Bert Bell pension plan that every player that is unhappy with the draft or wants to challenge it, if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't be getting their damn pension.
And that's a good segue into a little bit more about your father, Bert Bell, who was the NFL commissioner. A lot of people don't know the impact he had on the game. Besides creating the draft, he came up with overtime. He came up with the 2-minute warning, the pension fund. Those were his inventions. Those are just a couple off the top of my head.
10 major things in pro football are still around today. He invented the waiver wire. He invented, he didn't invent it in 1946, where there was a report of a bribe before the championship game. It was his first year in office. He had to go to New York. The Giants were playing the Chicago Bears for the World Championship, and there was a report. The district attorney, Frank Hogan, called and said, "You're going to be in my office because there were reported bribes by 2 Giant players, one the starting quarterback and the other Frank Filchak, and the other one the starting running back, Merrill Hayes." And my father went to New York. He was going up for the game anyway, but they spent the whole night before the game, and he on the spot decided to let Filchak play in the game. He suspended Hayes, and then after the game, he suspended both for life, and then basically called the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, and Davey O'Brien, who was this great little player, quarterback of the Eagles, who retired early and become the best pistol shot in America. And he got a hold of Davey O'Brien and said, "I need the names of ex-FBI men, because I'm going to put 1 or 2 in every city, in every big city, to report any type of bribe, attempted bribe. They will check all of the bars, restaurants, all the places where you can pick up rumors from players. He brought people from the locker room, no friends in there the day of the game, but then he instituted, which is still there today, although most teams lie about it, that every team had to report by Thursday any injury. It was an ankle injury, if it was an inch, whatever it was, you had to report it. That was a big savior, because I'll tell you what, if either one of those players had actually taken the bribe and the league and Bert Bell had done nothing, again, NFL, goodbye. I mean, it was front page news all over the country. Go check the clippings from 1946.
Right, and the NIT went down in stature because of something like that. So with CCNY in the late 40s, early 50s. So, I mean, that's right around the same time. It would have been catastrophic for the National Football League.
It would have, but at every turn, Bert Bell got the league through till Pete took over, and actually saved Pete Rozelle's job when he was going to quit in LA of the Rams. But at every juncture he made up the schedule. He was the one, the famous on any given Sunday that you hear all the time. That's Bert Bell's quote. It's on his life story. And he said he made up and did what they now do today by computer. He would schedule in the early part of the season, the week against the week and the strong against the strong. And when he was called by owners, they were bitching, or by newspapermen, he said, "Listen, boys," he said, "I want to tell you something. The way I'm doing the schedule, on any given Sunday, any team can beat any other team." That was in 1955, and it's still around today. So was the waiver wire. So everything that you see today was originally put in by Bert Bell.
And then you also, on your own, you had a career in the NFL as well, working in the personnel department for the Colts.
I can tell you, one of the things that you talked about is in the 60s, of course, the AFL was founded by Lamar Hunt. And Hunt actually wanted my father to be commissioner in both leagues. My father said, "I can't do it." The go-between between Lamar Hunt and Bert Bell was Davey O'Brien, his former quarterback, who lived in outside of Dallas in Fort Worth and was a good friend of Lamar Hunt. He tried to set it up. They had many meetings about it. But basically that league came along. He had died in October 1959, and the league started playing in 1960. But there was a war between the two leagues, and actually, I was one of early on in 1963. And when I just joined the personnel department out of the ticket department, I was one of the NFL babysitters that was sent to Atlanta to basically keep three players: Billy Martin, who was taken number one by the Bears, Billy Loffridge, a quarterback at Georgia Tech, and Ted Davis, who I took the Colts into taking. And basically my assignment was to keep them occupied for 3 days, make sure that they didn't fall into the hands of an AFL agent. And that period was amazing. I talked about much of it in a chapter of my book. I mean, players were being kidnapped, they were being taken from place to place, hidden in places. I had those three players in the hotel room. And finally, Bobby Dodd, the coach at Georgia Tech, said, one of his coaches over and said, "Listen, you know what? We can't have, these players have to go to class, Mr. Bell. You got to get them the hell out of the hotel room." I mean, this was going on. Otis Taylor, the great receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, people might not remember him today. I think should have been a Hall of Fame receiver.
Could be, should be.
Actually, Lamar Hunt sent his private jet, and he was being hidden out in a Dallas hotel by the Cowboys. They got into the hotel. One of their people, Lloyd Wells, who was a scout for Kansas City, they kidnapped him. Well, he wanted his own volition. They took him out a window to a waiting car. This is like right out of Superman, and whisked him away to Lamar Hunt's jet, and taken to Kansas City, and never had a chance to be drafted by the NFL because he signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, it was
and Upton, I know there's a story that you can share that where you also had done something on a field during the game to try to keep a scout away from a player.
What was it? Yeah, it was the Gator Bowl in Florida, and basically I had a check for the player that Tommy Blake from Georgia Tech that we had drafted as a junior draft eligible. And as soon as the game was over, I was to go out on the field to get him to sign it. I was really nervous about it because a scout from the Houston Oilers was there that also had drafted him. And it was a case of I had to beat him to Blake to make sure that he would sign the contract. And the other guy was trying to hold it off. So as I saw the other guy going out onto the field, I yelled to the cop, "Arrest him! He's out on the field." The cop arrested the Houston scout And I got over the blanket and nervous with right in the center of the field. I got him to sign a contract. I mean, people wouldn't believe these stories, but it was just an amazing time uh, to do that. I mean, you couldn't sometimes go into practices. I once disguised myself as a water boy because the coach of Texas Battle Royal, I looked like a kid. I was lucky, even in my 20s, I looked like I was 16 years old. And I actually disguised myself as a water boy so I could watch practice because Darrell Royal had kicked all the scouts out because of some of the illegal signings. So all of that stuff went on, including the night 1964. We're in San Francisco. Our team had just clinched the championship with the right to meet the Cleveland Browns in the championship game. We were Western Division champs. And so we're in San Francisco to play the 49ers, the final game of the season in December. But, because the leagues were still fighting right in the middle of it, we held our draft. And their team, wherever they were, on the road or not, held the draft. And the central headquarters was the league headquarters in New York. So basically, the night of the draft, which started like at 6 o'clock, the personnel director, my boss, had a heart attack. He carried him out of the draft room, and Shula turned to me and said, "Kid, you're in charge. Don't screw it up." And here I am. And basically, I've got to not only impress Shula, but I better know what the hell I'm talking about.
So Don Shula turns to you just as the draft is about to start, and says, "Okay, Upton, here are the keys to the franchise. You drive it through the upcoming draft."
Well, yeah, and followed by "Don't screw it up." And actually, it just shows you the luck. Even though I was really well prepared, I never thinking that my boss would have a heart attack. But 5 out of the 6 players that I drafted, and I got Shula to go along with the number 1, which was Mike Curtis, who I believe the linebacker from Duke belongs in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Sure.
But number 1 was Mike Curtis. Number 2 played 10 years and should be in the Hall of Fame. Ralph Neely of Oklahoma I drafted, but basically because we didn't think we could sign him, and it looked like some of the other teams in the AFL might sign him, we traded his rights to Dallas. So I drafted Curtis 1, Ralph Neely 2, and then the next 3 or 4 picks, Marty Schottenheimer, who was signed with Buffalo, wouldn't sign with us, and of course went on to become a great coach, and Al Atkinson was the other one who ended up playing against the Colts as part of the 68 Jets team that beat us in the Super Bowl. So 4 out of my first 5 all became top players in the NFL. I said to myself, that'll never happen again.
Well, and that kind of brings us to a question that we have about scouting, and maybe you can give us some insight. So you had some great picks in that draft, but then there are situations like somebody's asking, how do all of the scouts in the NFL miss on a player like Tom Brady and let him go so far and don't? How does it happen that a great player like that, a future superstar, doesn't even get on the radar, really?
Well, it was true then, and it's true now, and it was true back in 1935. I think there's too much information out there today, number 1. And every coach and scout will tell you can never have enough information. But I quote a person I hired to be my personnel director here at the Patriots, Bucko Kilroy: "Overanalysis makes for paralysis." And in the case of Tom Brady, I can give you many other cases. I'll give you an example in my case, and then we'll get to Brady.
Sure.
In 1969, there was a defensive end that was 6'7", 195 pounds, playing for the University of Miami. His name is Ted Hendricks.
Hall of Famer.
And in the second round, I said to Shula, I said, I think we're going to draft him. And luckily, Bill Arnsparger sided with me on this. The legendary assistant coach with the Dolphins' no-name defense later on in his career. And Shula said to me, Upton, what the hell where the hell is he going to play? He said he's a great player. I can see it from the film. And it was filmed, today's tape. And he had a really good Senior Bowl. He said, where's he going to play? He said he's a stand-up, really, outside defensive end. I said, outside linebacker. He said, at 195 pounds? I said, you can put weight on him. I said, he's as strong as anybody. I said, he's one of the smartest players. This is true. In those days, you could give IQ tests. It was called the Wonderlic test. It's a football IQ test, really, the Wonderlic. And some people, I think, still give it today. I said, the guy rated a genius. He's the smartest guy I've ever tested as a player. And I said, he'll play 10 years for you as an outside linebacker. And Arnsparger went along with me. And I convinced Shula. We took him in the second round. Everybody loved him as a college player. Nobody thought he was going to be great. Today, he's in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
Raiders, just incredible. Probably as good as anybody at blocking extra points and field goals. One of the greats of all time at that position.
They call him the Mad Stork, which is interesting.
Stork. So that partially explains Brady. And here's what I think has happened. And this year is going to be a real test because with the virus, with COVID, you didn't have 3 or 4 days in Indianapolis with the combine. And everybody gets a chance to take a look at people. I think it's too much, by the way. There's only a certain amount you can know. But anyway, look, I can see what happened to Brady. They put so much emphasis on the 40-yard dash, which Paul Brown initially was the person to put him in, saying, the farthest a football player's going to have to run is 40 yards, so let's see how fast they are. So Brady ran like a 5.440. And then, you see the picture of him stripped down, and, his skin is milk white, and it looks like he'd be best swimming than playing football. So instead of going and looking at, his arm wasn't great. It's never been great. It's good, damn good. But when you look at it, instead of going and they look at it there and say, he's not particularly impressive, who knows? And what happens is you start dropping in the first round, and before you know it, it's like Brady, you're in the 5th, 6th round. So what happened was, instead of looking at Brady's career, even though he had to, and very bitterly, never forgave the Michigan coach for it. When you look at the big games, Brady always won them. Even the Orange Bowl, Brady won the game. And instead of looking at them and saying, and they're going to have that trouble this year with the Alabama quarterback, because he reminds a lot of people of Brady. They're not overly impressive, but all they do is win. And so in the case of Brady, remember too, in those days, the quarterback has always been very important. I once said in my book, 2 most important positions in America are president of the United States and quarterback in the NFL. But they looked, he wasn't impressive. He couldn't run fast. He looked like he needed a tanner. And again, by the way, if that coach who died at the Patriots hadn't almost insisted They wouldn't have drafted him even then. And I doubt, by the way, he might end up as a free agent on some lousy team and been nowhere, which shows you luck in the draft, luck in life. So to explain, you have to explain again what you see. I see this every day. ESPN, back to back shows on the NFL draft. The NFL Network, ad nauseum. The local talk shows, which are big here. 24 hours a day, the draft, this and that. Great for the NFL because they are promoting something that is second only to the Super Bowl in popularity around the country because everybody thinks they're a scout, which is great. But I will tell you this, 2 things to remember, your audience. 1946, my first training camp with the Bears. Now, I lived with football players as a kid when my father owned the Eagles. So I was always around football players.
And your dad would visit all of the team's training camps as commissioner.
Well, yeah, I've been to every one of them. In those days, 1946, the average life of a pro football player was 3 to 3.5 years. It is now 2021. It's the same. It's still the average life of a pro football player is 3.5 years. Going back to the first draft in 1936, it's almost the same average of who makes it and who doesn't. So I think Bert Bell in his own mind wanted to say pro football, but he understood. Remember, he was the quarterback at Penn between the first pass in Rose Bowl history in 1960. So he was a quarterback, a coach, an owner, and eventually a commissioner. He knew the game from every aspect. And what he knew as a player is injuries, you name it. But particularly when you're drafting a player, it's at best an educated guess. And again, your audience, that's what it is. Some of these people, Mel Kiper Jr., he's not a scout, but he's as big a deal on ESPN as anybody. His guess is as good as Bill Belichick sitting here with a ton of scouts. And what is going to be interesting this year, and why I go back and say in 1936, players better, quicker, stronger, faster, maybe not more intelligent, but it's still the same story. It's still a great guess. So this year they're now saying, well, wait till next year because with COVID, you didn't have the big test for 2 or 3 days at the combine in Indianapolis, and you had some pro days. Most of them were for the quarterbacks. We never had pro days. If you don't know what the player can do, what do you think a pro day is going to do? And those days, by the way, the colleges would let you in to look at their players. Pros on the campus after the season, no way. But again, I keep going back to they now say next year will be better because we'll have the combine. They know less about a player this year than they have in the past. You know what I say? Hallelujah! I like the idea. Geez, it's what it's always been. It's a great guessing game. And again, anybody on Facebook, go back if you want to take the time. Go back to the first draft in 1936 and trace it. You can because with your computer you can do anything in 10 seconds. Mm-hmm. And trace it to today, and you tell me, with all the things that have been instituted, how much difference the percentage is that a player making from then to today. I'm betting it's within a couple of percentage points.
Yeah, I think you're right, and especially with Hall of Fames players, players making the Hall of Fame, you're lucky if you get 4 or 5 guys in any given class. And when it's more than that, it's a big deal. And that still is the same even today.
Well, here's the one thing that has really changed in the game. When they changed the rules back in the 80s, and when they really opened up the game, now to me, it's really pinball, pitch and catch. You don't have a quarterback. You could get by all the way up till like maybe the middle 80s. I'm thinking of Marino, and it was great, and Elway and people like that. But you had to have a running game to go with your quarterback. If you didn't have some type of running game, only Air Coryell at San Diego really basically threw the ball on every down. But
and a lot of those were yeah, go ahead. I was just going to add that a lot of those passes were kind of like long handoffs in a way.
Well, yeah, and it did change when Bill Walsh had Joe Montana. Basically, Walsh's whole philosophy was, why should I hand it off to a running back when I can do the same thing, having my quarterback throw a 3-yard pass, get him out in the flat, do all the different things. It's be much easier to do that. So the game now, if you don't have a quarterback, you are not going to make it. You are not going to make it even to the playoffs. Take a look at every team last year. Name me one team that was in the playoffs that didn't have a quarterback. So the quarterback's even more important now because the game has changed so much. It's open. You've got slot receivers. You've got wide receivers. You've got the running game. Jimmy Brown is Jimmy Brown, who was probably still the greatest running back. Or Earl Campbell, think of him. They wouldn't be around today.
They certainly wouldn't be the top pick in the draft like Earl Campbell was, probably.
No, well, you wouldn't see that. It's right now, they're even in the first round, probably forcing certain quarterbacks into it that ordinarily maybe is or second round picks or something like that. Is Matt Jones a true first round pick? The number 3 or 4 in the draft? I'm not sure that he is. If the game were different, where if you don't have a quarterback, you can't throw the ball, you're not going anywhere. We see that with the Patriots. Goodbye, Tom Brady. Hello, mediocrity. But Matt Jones, he might be a late first-round choice. But now you have the case of the 49ers considering Matt Jones as they traded 2 number 1 picks away to get the 3rd pick in the draft. Trevor Lawrence is going to be number 1. And after that, we're not sure what the Jets will do. There are 2 or 3 other quarterbacks there. But the 49ers could take Matt Jones of Alabama. I think he's pretty good. But is he a surefire number 1, very top of the draft guy? I don't think so. I could be wrong. But that's what it's forced it to be. The running back is basically like the dinosaur, extinct. So all of those changes we've seen, but I go back, it's almost like the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang Theory of the NFL. I hate to tell people this, but really everything has changed except those percentages. They're the same.
A 3.5-year average career in the NFL.
3.5 average career, and the percentages of making it are less than 50%.
I wanted you kind of touched on something that I wanted to bring up and ask you about, because you were talking about Trevor Lawrence going number 1 overall and these quarterbacks being drafted so high, and but in the early days and even in the 80s and even in Aaron Rodgers' case, they had a few years to kind of learn the position as a backup better and to play at the NFL level. How much do you think that the pressure of going to a team and expect it to change immediately, how much do you think that affects a player now?
It doesn't, because here's what's when I first started scouting in colleges, the quarterback was important, but not that important. You had to have a running game. Remember, we had all sorts of iterations in college. You had the wishbone, you had all sorts of things. But the quarterback really wasn't a passing quarterback. There were very few. Even Joe Willie Namath out of Alabama before he got hurt. I mean, he was good, but everybody had to have a running game. What has changed in college now really basically starts out in high school. All these kids now, the offense that they're running in the colleges is really a pro offense, in some ways more advanced than the pro game. And so these kids that are coming in today are ready much faster to play than they were years ago. Trevor Lawrence will play immediately. Zach Wilson will play immediately. I like, by the way, my favorite quarterback, who has less experience as far as the pro game is concerned, is, I think, Justin Fields has the highest, up next to Trevor Lawrence, the highest rate of probability. Not everybody agrees with what I think, but basically, because the colleges and the high school, these kids are really playing 6-on-6, 7-on-7. And again, when they come in to the pros, they're a lot more ready to play today than they ever were. So that is not a problem. Look at Joe Burrow. Till Cincinnati screwed it up and didn't get enough people around him, basically, and he hurt his knee. He was terrific.
Gifted player.
They just stink, and I hope that he's okay and will be able to come back. But a lot of people are able to come in and play almost immediately because of their training. Trevor Lawrence threw the ball like you would in the pro game in your third or fourth year.
Yeah, exactly.
So they come more ready to play than they did in the past.
And like you said, they play more organized. They're running offensive plays in high school that players wouldn't be running until much older back in the 60s.
That's correct. So all of that has really added to the game. Because here, I mean, the NFL is amazing in that they just sold $1 billion contract for networks, and eventually you're going to see more and more online football. We'll see how that ends up and how much they're going to charge the fans for that. We'll see. But you're seeing so many young players coming in. But on the other hand, with 32 teams, take a look every year at the teams that make the playoffs. And of course, even now that I think there are too many teams, but they don't care. They want more and more teams each year. Now we got an extra added game. We'll see. 17 game schedule. I think it's too much, but that's what it is. That's what sells to the network. But again, I would say out of the 32 teams, maybe 16 of them have either a great or decent quarterback. Maybe. So what happens to the other 16 teams? How do they go from the bottom to the top? How does Buffalo go from a joke to now the team that basically here should be taking the place of the Patriots? How does Miami come back? Josh Allen, Tua in Miami. That's how they come back. You can have your weaknesses, but if you have a really good quarterback or development, Malin's finally getting there with great tools. Patrick Mahomes, look at those players now.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them can really run. Most of them are very athletic. Justin Fields ran like a 4.40. He's a quarterback at 230-some pounds.
It's unheard of. It's faster than Bob Hayes,
Yeah. Yeah.
or as fast as Bob Hayes.
So we're seeing more and more extraordinary athletic feats. But we're also seeing we're back to the norm again. What are your percentages of winning in the NFL today with all the different rule changes, with a game as wide open as it is? What are your percentages of winning if you don't have a quarterback? Easily less than 50%.
Exactly. And you think about the quarterbacks that were in the Super Bowl this year. Mahomes had won the last Super Bowl. Brady had won several. And then you had Aaron Rodgers in the conference championship game. You had Josh Allen, who's an up-and-coming quarterback. And you can go back, I think.
Every one of them had a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think going back to last year's AFC Championship game, I think it was probably about going back to 1999 that either Roethlisberger, Brady, or a couple other quarterbacks, at least one of them had been playing in the AFC Championship game. So it is.
What I also think you kind of see the trend is disappearing is the pocket quarterback. I think those days are not totally over. And the interesting thing about Brady, what he's really learned how to do, because he's more of a pocket quarterback, is A, get the ball out of his hands very quickly. And the other thing is learning to step aside and move side to side in the pocket. So even though he doesn't run, and he's really not a very good runner at all, the trend is going towards the quarterbacks that can run, can take off when they're in trouble. But that pocket breaks down pretty quickly today. You don't have as much time, even from the shotgun. And that's another change. Quarterback today, how many times do you see a quarterback under center? Very rarely, even Brady.
Mm-hmm.
The shotgun has totally taken over the game. So all of these different machinations, all of these different moves have changed the game to a great degree. And you have to be a much better athlete. So there we are.
And here we are, Upton. We've been live here for about an hour, and I really appreciate your time. I'd like to close it with one more question from the audience here. Somebody is asking, what do you think your dad would say about all the media hype around today's NFL draft? And I think that's especially considering, like you said, there wasn't any press at the first NFL draft.
Well, first and foremost, and I understand the league doesn't want to over-publicize somebody, and they should, but they don't. It should be called the Bert Bell draft. And more people have said that because, again, he was the founder of it. Well, I think the interesting thing about my father was he was so far ahead of his time. I don't think he would have been surprised, because one of the things that he started to do, even though the draft was held while he was commissioner in Philadelphia all the time, where his league office was, is he invited the press and really courted the press. And basically, for those times, in the 50s all the way up to the 60s, they had pretty good attendance. What happened, and actually I was part of the first draft show on ESPN in 1980. And what happened was, when ESPN went to Pete Rozelle and said that we'd like to televise it, we'll pay a certain amount of money, Rozelle wasn't so home in the beginning, but then he finally decided to do it. I don't think my father would be that surprised by it. I think he would be really thrilled to know that his idea and what happened is now a behemoth. It's showbiz. He believed that pro football, the difference in his opinion, pro football should be about show business. I do want to leave you with this too, but a lot of people don't know, and I was asked about this the other day. Is the first nationally televised Monday night game was not the first national contract. The first national contract was negotiated by Bert Bell back in the 50s with the Dumont Network.
Back in the 50s, you said?
Back in the 50s. And it was Saturday Night Football, and it was the biggest thing on television. Black and white. He even had a football design, a white football, great football, with a black stripe around it. I still have one of them here someplace.
Yeah, and occasionally online you'll see that white football that was used for black and white television.
Yeah, he was the father again of really basically what became Monday Night Football. And again, the media really publicized it, but three-quarters of the media didn't know that it was Bert Bell that started night football on television. And the only reason that he broke said it's become so popular that the colleges had came to Bert Bell and they said, listen, you're hurting our game. Our game is on Friday and Saturday afternoon, Saturday nights. We're asking you to not do it. We'll sue you, but we're asking you not to do it. Help us promote our game. And he voluntarily said, okay, I won't do it. If not, that Saturday night game would be today one of the biggest things you've seen.
And you wouldn't have Saturday night primetime college football.
Yeah, well, that's like ifs in life. But again, you could see how far he was headed. The other thing is, back in the 30s, the first pro football game ever televised was his Philadelphia Eagles against the Brooklyn Dodgers. And that was because NBC wanted to show something at the World's Fair. And they contacted him. He said, do the game. New York Times wrote a story about it about a year or so ago. So everything we have talked about tonight really comes from Bert Bell's mind.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Upton. And this is the first edition of The Game Before the Money Facebook Live. And we have Upton Bell. Be sure to check out his book, Present at the Creation, which is published by the University of Nebraska Press, as is the book, The Game Before the Money. We're co-partners as authors for the University of Nebraska Press, and we appreciate them as well. Upton, thanks so much.
What other thing I want to add?
Sure.
Because this cast and the other ones that I've been involved with you in The Game Before the Money, they'll all be on now. It's going to be one of the largest collections in the country. The Upton Bell collection at the University of Massachusetts Amherst has the whole history starting back in the 30s of pro football, with pictures, video, audio tape, and all sorts of stuff, including my Super Bowl ring, my father's different trophies. So your show and The Game Before the Money, the excerpts I've done, if you go to the Upton Bell collection at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, you will see all of it.
Yes, and check that out online. You can Google, I think it's Upton Bell Collection, University of Massachusetts. That'll come up.
Yep, that's right. And so all that history will be there, including interviews like this. So it's great to be on. It's great to be on Facebook.
Well, it's fantastic, as always, to chat with you, Upton. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to end this.